Hi guys, my name is Trinity, and if you're here, you are here to see me talk about the best books that I read in 2022. Now, because I have 15 books, I didn't want to dig them out of my shelves because I have another video that I'm about to do where I had to dig a bunch of books out of my shelves, and I didn't want to create a huge mess. So I do own these books. I just don't have them with me right here, but most of them are right behind me, and I probably would have had to empty out this shelf to do this video. So that's kind of where we're going with that. Now, usually I do a top 10 at the end of the year, and this year it was just too hard. It was way too hard to narrow down 10 books, mainly because I did a readathon in July, and in that month I read so many good books that I had to just come on here and talk about more than 10. It's gonna be 15. And I know Andrew over at Wizardly Reads does 15 anyway, so, and it's a great excuse to talk about more books, especially ones that you love. And I don't think I will be doing a worst books of the year video because I don't believe that books are bad. But if you want to know what book I just hated, there's plenty of videos that talk about the one book this year that I just really hated. Okay, so the first book that I have to talk about in my favorites of the year, even though I actually haven't finished it, is Azura Ghost by Essa Hansen. Now, I've talked a lot about why I haven't finished this book, about the high thinking concepts being too much for my brain fog to handle, and how when I sit down to read it, every single time I get interrupted. But I have to say, I love this world. I love these characters. I love Essa's writing. No Fet Gloss is one of my favorite audiobooks that I've ever listened to. Azura did not get an audiobook. And let me tell you, there are people willing to petition to have an audiobook of Azura Ghost made. But this book has really great representation. We have an autistic author, if you didn't know that, and an autistic main character. We have so many great things in this book that I can't really go into details about because some of it is a little spoilery. But this I would almost tout as sci-fantasy because of the way it's written and some of the elements that are utilized. It reads sci-fantasy because there's definitely magic going on in this world. Even though a lot of it is science-based, there's definitely magic. The Graven themselves, there's definitely something going on there that is outside the realm of science. But yes, I absolutely love the Graven series. And if you guys have seen my favorite sci-fi series, you will know this. So Azura Ghost is getting kind of an honorable mention on this list because I haven't actually finished the book yet. And I can't talk about favorite books of the year without talking about the book that I actually read 3 times last year. 3 times. And I did this because it very instantly became a comfort read for me. And that is not something I find very often. Like, you guys know, I will sit and play Mass Effect all day. Whenever I'm having a bad day, that is my go-to. That or Dragon Age. I have these things that I cling to whenever I am in a bad mood. And The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood just became that thing last year. And I read the book 3 times. I thought it was a fantastic fan fiction style romance, and I am an avid reader of fan fiction. I write fan fiction, and it is centered on Raylo. So that really got to me, and I just loved it so much. And yeah, I read it 3 times, 3 times last year. On that note, there were 2 other romances that I really loved, and they were fantasy romances that had a really great fantasy plot. If you've watched my videos recently, you will know I'm on a mission to find romances with a great fantasy plot, and that would be A Strange and Stubborn Endurance and The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy. I thought both of these were absolutely amazingly well done. And I really loved the relationships in both of these books. Now, we do have a little bit of an enemies to lovers kind of situation in The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy. It is very much a zombie type novel, and I loved the whole "you've got mail" thing that they had going on in the story, writing an anonymous letter and, sending it into the void, hoping someone reads it. And then that person reads it, or someone reads it and responds. And then you guys don't know who you're talking to, but You get to have these really heartfelt conversations about your life to an anonymous person, and that anonymous person responds in kind and shares what's going on with their life. It's just really, really cute. But then it had a really great fantasy plot. Like I said, we have these bodies that are becoming reanimated and no one really knows why. So we have a bounty hunter who is chasing these zombies and trying to make sure that they are taken to Mercy so that she can ensure that they will not rise again. And it's really cool how they've figured out how to do that. And then Mercy herself, she is kind of under scrutiny because of the job that she has and a big corporation coming in and trying to take over and run her out of town. So there's a lot going on in that book that I just really adored. And like I said, a great romance with a great fantasy plot with it, or sci-fi plot, I guess you could say. Again, it's a bit sci-fantasy. And then A Strange and Stubborn Endurance. While it is very dark, and there are a lot of trigger warnings to be touted around this book, like there's a lot. I do think it has a very, very cute romance. And then, you know, the dark stuff going on around them. We have sibling rivalry in politics, and one is meant to be the heir, and then the siblings are not all right with that, and then there's a coup that ensues, and the people of this world don't like that their prince is going to be marrying into this country. There's a whole lot going on, and I really enjoyed the fantasy plot of this book as much as I did the romance. And again, these two have launched me on a mission. They were so good. And then, of course, we have The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. I've always loved the story of the island of Dr. Moreau. And I mean, I watched the movies when I was little, and I read the book when I was older. And then I read the Athena Club, The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodore Goss. And Catherine Moreau was one of my favorite characters in that series. And so having the daughter of Dr. Moreau being the main character of this book, I thought was really cool. Seeing the events that occurred on the island from a different perspective. There's a bit of spice to this book that I wasn't anticipating, and I enjoyed that as well. And you kind of get to see the daughter's perspective of, you know, what her dad has done and how she's survived and what she thinks about all of that, and how other people viewed what was going on the island aside from the daughter, and how it affected the daughter's life, like how she was able to have a life outside of what was done to her, but also how she was isolated most of the time. It was really, really good, really entertaining, and a little heartfelt, like I said, a little steamy at times, and it was just so good. It was so good. Sylvia Moreno Garcia, she has kind of, I have a love-hate relationship with her books because they're either a 5-star or I hate them. Now I say that. Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, I also read last year, and it was a 4-star, but it was a novella. So I have a hard time giving novellas 5 stars because there's not enough story for me. But again, it was really good. Really, really good. And I'm waiting more Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Bring it on. Bring it on. Next, we have The Book Eaters by Sunyi Dean. Now, this one I actually don't have a physical copy of because Sunyi sent me the audiobook when it was available, and I listened to it, and I'm on a mission to purchase an Illumicrate edition whenever I can. And so I don't actually have a physical copy. It is one I am seeking out a special edition of because I love the book so much. But this one, I really love stories that focus on motherhood. And it's because we don't see parents a lot in fantasy novels. And, you know, the absentee parent thing is an issue for me. It bugs me. And so when I come across a parent-child relationship that I adore and I can cling on to, then I do. This will be true of another series that's going to hit this list, another book that will hit this list. But I really loved Sunyi's writing. She really captivates this whole fairy tale, like dark fairy tale atmosphere. And she really addresses women's issues in a way that really makes you think and really grips your heart. And, you know, having a son that is a bit of an outcast, the main character of this story, she's forced to face a lot of things that women face whenever they make decisions outside of the norm in the real world. And so I really enjoyed it. I loved it so much. But that also brings me to the next book that had the same themes of isolation, themes of abuse, just really dark atmosphere and a different way of thinking, and, you know, kind of putting you in the victim's shoes and letting you see how all of it plays out for the victim and how it can be really heart-wrenching and just hit you straight in the gut with what these women have to face. And that would be A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Now, I read the self-pub version of it and then got the Fairy Loot version of it in the mail and was very excited to actually have the Fairy Loot version. I did not read the epilogue that is added into the new version, the traditionally published version. So I don't know how that turns out, but I absolutely loved A Dowry of Blood. And I've actually been pushing it. Like, I really want other people to read it because I think it is just beautifully done. And like I said, the themes of isolation and abuse and how this affects the psyche of the person that is being abused and all that stuff, I think it's really, really well done. And then we have Burning Blade and Silver Eye by Django Wexler. Now, I'm one of those people that I really don't like derivative stories. I really don't like the retelling of Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. Like, I really don't like that. Don't give me that. But if you make nods to certain series, certain things that I love, I will adore it. Just give me an original story to go alongside it. I don't need to read Lord of the Rings again, or Wheel of Time, or Game of Thrones, any of that. Like, it's been done. You don't have to do it again. There's no point. But Burning Blade and Silver Eye by Django Wexler, I actually heard a description said of this series that really like stuck with me after I heard it. And it's, what if the Jedi weren't the good guys? I was like, yeah, that is what this book is. That is what this series is. And I read Ashes of the Sun and Blood of the Chosen last year, and I loved it. But it is very much what if the Jedi weren't the good guys. So very much pulls from Star Wars, but it nods to Star Wars. There aren't full rips of Star Wars in this. They do use lightsabers, but that's about the only thing that is just fully taken from Star Wars. But yeah, what if the Jedi were not the good guys? And if that doesn't intrigue you, we have a brother and a sister that end up on opposite sides of a war. There's a rebellion and an empire, just like in Star Wars. And it's really great to see how both sides are wrong and right in this whole scenario. I love seeing both sides of the story. I love seeing how the sister has to fight for the empire because she feels indebted to them, but she also believes that there's good there. And then I love how the brother is fully rebelling against the empire, but he doesn't always think the empire is bad. And it's just really good. It's really good. There are a lot of great characters. There's a lot of great settings in this story. And I had so much fun reading both of these. And there's a character in it that I absolutely love, but I don't want to spoil anything. Like, talking about them would lead me to talking about what happens to them. And I just absolutely loved it. Then we have Escaping Exodus by Nikki Drayden. This is the weirdest book I've ever loved. I've talked about it quite a lot, so I'll try to be brief. But this is about people who are having to live inside of a space beast. And this is all they've ever known, but their space beast is dying, and they're trying to figure out what are their next steps going to be. How are they going to survive the space beast that they've lived in all their lives dying? And it gives some really cool concepts for how this would work. And it also talks about the feelings of this space beast that they've lived in for so long. And someone finally connecting with the actual being of this space beast. And it's just so cool. I love it. I love it so much. There is a second book, And when I bought the first book, I didn't know that. And I have yet to pick up the second book, but I'm very excited to do so. And then, of course, we have Madship by Robin Hobb. Oh my gosh, I love Madship, guys. I loved it. I loved Live Ship Traders. And I'm going to talk about something a little bit, just because I don't think I've actually spoken about this with Robin Hobb. But I'm one of those people that I don't like a lot of description unless it's purposeful. Now, Anthony Ryan is a master at purposeful description, which is probably why I love him so much. But Robin Hobb does this as well. There are things I don't like about Game of Thrones, such as I've always talked about his description of the wall. It was like 3 pages long. Why? What do you need to know about the wall? That it's supposedly impenetrable, that it stood for however many years, and you need to know about the Night's Watch, right? But what else do you need to know? Nothing. There's nothing else you need to know. So why was it 3 pages long? I don't understand. But Robin Hobb and Anthony Ryan, they do like really good description without burdening the reader with a bunch of useless information. So I absolutely loved that about Robin Hobb's writing. I was so happy to find another fantasy author that could contain that. Like, we get world building. We know why we're here. We're here for a new world to explore, and that is great. But when you start describing something and it takes you forever and you get verbose about it, you lose me. Absolutely lose me. And Robin Hobb did that so well. And like I said, that's not the whole reason I loved it, but I hadn't talked about that yet. So I did want to talk about that. But Robin Hobb delves so deep into the lore of her world, and I love that as well. I really enjoy and hate some of the characters in this series. And so having this be like the meat of the story, like, I really loved that as well, because a lot of times in second books, we have what they call second book syndrome. We have the beginning of the story, and then we have the end of the story. And the second part, the middle part, kind of gets lost in trying to ride that out. But in Madship, we get a lot of the meat of this story. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And if I haven't said this yet, these are not in any particular order. This is just me talking about the books that I loved this year. All right, next we have Bonds of Chaos, Threadlight, second favorite fantasy book series of all time. Why? Let me tell you why. We have a family that is the heart of this series, and I love that. I told you that would come up again. We have husband and wife and their baby, that this is what the story is all about, is them trying to figure out how they're going to make it in this world. Now, they're not the only characters in this, but they're the ones that we are following the most. And I loved them. I loved them as a couple. I loved them as individual characters. I loved them as parents. I loved them as husband and wife. Like, adored them so much. Of course, there is 2 others, Alvarax and Laurel, and they make up the rest of these books and just make these books so entertaining. And there are things about it that just kill me. Like, this was an emotional roller coaster for me, especially in regards to Laurel and Alvarax. Now, Chris, I really loved him and I really felt for his struggle, but I loved the unit of Chris and Ariel. I hope I said that right. I hope I got the right name, because I'm horrible with names. But I loved them so much. It's just, I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. That's all I can say. But Bonds of Chaos concludes Threadlight, and so I can't talk too much about it other than saying Alvarax and his grandfather, I love that relationship. I love it. And yeah, that's all I can say about Bonds of Chaos. Then we have A Touch of Light by Tiago Abdallah. Now, talk about everything I love in fantasy. We have dark fantasy. This borderlines on grimdark. I will say that. It borderlines on grimdark. We have characters from all different walks of life. Loved that. I loved seeing the world through all of these different lenses. We have religion. I love religion in fantasy. I can't say that enough. I love when an author dissects religion without it having to be what's right and what's wrong, and looks at both sides of the religious mindset and really just shows how flawed each side can be. And I love it. 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 And that's going to come again with another book I'm going to talk about. But I just, the writing in this is so good for a debut. It blows me away. But I also really love that Thiago Abdallah does not info dump. We learn alongside of the characters, Call of the Bone Ships, which, I mean, the Bone Ships almost made this list. And I really love when you are dropped into this setting and you learn alongside the characters. You're not given just this well of history. I like lore, don't get me wrong. But when you just start trying to talk about the history and it reads like a history book, you've lost me. Mythology, I can get on board with. History, not so much. But he does not info dump. And so this book has so much in it for how short it is because there is no info dumping. But I don't even, like, I'm getting to the point where I'm excited about these books so much that I don't know what to say about them. This happens to me all the time when I get excited about something. My brain decides it doesn't want to work anymore. We have some morally gray characters. We have a grimdark setting. We have religion. We have political machinations all over the place. And a great new world to explore. I absolutely loved A Touch of Light. A Shade of Madness, I'm so excited for. It just released and I can't wait to get my hands on it. I probably will wait for the audiobook because Kevin Kemp did such a great job, but so good. Engines of Empire by R.S.FORD. People, read this book. I've been trying to get everybody to read this book because I loved it. You're going to see a theme in the rest of the books in this video because I really like when religion is explored. But this one is really cool because all of the characters that you follow in this story are family. So there's the matriarch of the family who is running a big part of the political sphere in this world. And she's about to pass the torch. And she's about to pass the torch to her daughter. And then she has a son who is in the military, who knows a very dark secret about his mother. And a son who is an alchemist, I believe. And he gets entangled in his own storyline as she tries to get her kids to grow up and to own who they are and the path that they've chosen. But none of them actually want to go the path that their mother has chosen for them or the path they chose for themselves and end up in some very precarious situations. It leads to us exploring this world through the lens of all of these different characters and getting to meet the natives of this world. And there's just so many things I loved about it. The writing is really good. All of the characters have their own voice, and I loved that. And I really loved that this book kind of showed how mistakes can be made, and it really focuses on the engines of empire, like how an empire runs, and when this cog breaks down, this happens. And it was really, really cool to see how R.S.FORD put all of these things in motion and made it work like a really functioning engine. Like, it was really cool. I absolutely loved it. Next is the series I haven't been able to shut up about at all, period, point blank, at all this year. In the Orbit of Sirens by T.A. Bruno. Now, I've compared this to Mass Effect a few times, and I stand by it. I stand by it. But the reason I compare it to Mass Effect is not for like military fantasy or military sci-fi or anything like that. It is because the world that T.A. Bruno has created is a world I want to explore. So that's like sitting down to play a Mass Effect game for me. Every time I sit down to play it, there's just all of these things that I want to explore. I want to meet the aliens. I want to explore the worlds. I want to see how all of these worlds differ. I want to know how this race's powers work. How did we become biotics? All of that stuff. And in the Orbit of Sirens, like, it delves into all of those things about this world, the aliens that we encounter, some of the fantastical elements that you get to discover within the world. And this is a generational story. So I have read the whole series, and I really like how T.A. Bruno, like in the Orbit of Sirens, was definitely my favorite. But I really like how he extended this world by showing us the next generation after in the Orbit of Sirens, and how what happened with the people who first landed on Chimeria, how what they had to go through was going to affect their kids and everything like that. It was really cool. I absolutely loved In the Orbit of Sirens, but I can't recommend this enough, especially if you like exploring those new worlds, meeting the aliens, learning how civilization has to develop once we've left planet Earth. And yeah, it's just so good. It is absolutely one of my favorite sci-fi series of all time. Just adored it. Adored it. Okay, and then last, you probably already know, I'm going to talk about The Martyr by Anthony Ryan. It's right behind me here. Anthony Ryan's writing is probably my favorite. It's my favorite. It is definitely my favorite. But The Covenant of Steel, I think, is Anthony Ryan's best writing to date. I love Bloodsong. Bloodsong will be my favorite book of all time, I think, until Anthony Ryan writes something better. And I think The Martyr came close. If I liked Alwyn as much as I liked Valen, then yeah, that one would probably be my favorite. But I really like Valen Alsorna. He's my favorite character of all time. I really love his journey, and I really love the way he responds to people. Like, I just love Valen so much. And that is what keeps Bloodsong my favorite book as opposed to The Martyr. But again, history, religion, political machinations, everything I love in fantasy. Add on top of that the best writing that I've ever read for my personal taste. And Anthony Ryan has taken a darker route with The Covenant of Steel than he has in his other books, and I enjoy that as well. But The Martyr has to be my favorite of the year. Even though I said none of these were in order, I had to finish out this video with that book because you guys already knew it was coming. You guys have seen my battle of the books. You guys know how much I love Anthony Ryan to begin with, and I can't recommend The Covenant of Steel enough. Now, if you've read Anthony Ryan in the past and didn't quite click, this might be the way to go, because this is more traditional fantasy than what he usually writes. Draconis Memoria is the one that's way outside the box. Bloodsong was great, but people didn't like the shift in the other two books. I liked it. Like, I liked the other two books. But this is more written in a traditional fantasy vein, and so I think a lot of people are going to really like The Covenant of Steel. All right, that is it for me today. Like, subscribe, do all the fun things, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.